Legal should not be satisfied being the cost center bottleneck, right? Which is we read it on LinkedIn all the time, like we've heard about it for years and years and years, right? Let's not be satisfied. And so, okay, well, what does that mean? It means looking at technology and how we can utilize it to drive enhancements in quality, efficiency, and capacity.
Welcome back to CZ and Friends, where we talk with legal leaders, technologists, and operators driving innovation and excellence inside their companies and beyond. I'm your host, Cecilia Zaniti. Today's guest is Chuck Kable, the General Counsel and Corporate Secretary at Innovative Renal Care. Over his career, Chuck has held executive roles at Axiom Medical, Emerus, and Cardon Outreach, where he led major private equity transactions, scaled legal teams from the ground up, and partnered with boards driving transformation. Chuck's track record is particularly impressive. He orchestrated a turnaround at Cardon that resulted in a $400 million acquisition, 16x valuation increase. At Emerus, he built an entire legal department while leading a $500 million private equity deal and eliminating outside counsel costs, get this, entirely. In this episode, we'll explore how general counsels can step up as true executive leaders, what Chuck has learned guiding companies through high growth inflection points, and his perspective on the evolving role of legal in the C-suite. Little story, I met Chuck actually doing a demo for him and thought immediately, this is a cool guy I want to have on the pod. So let's dive in. Chuck, welcome to the show.
Hi, it's good to be here.
All right, great. So looking at your career arc, you've been kind of a private equity guy. What does that mean?
Yeah, it was actually by accident, but so private equity, right? It's private money, so it's not publicly traded businesses. And for me, it was right place, right time, and I guess right skill set, right? So I had some unique experiences in my career that led the guys at Cardon to kind of reach out to me. And so when I started there, they were not private equity backed. They were kind of a bootstrapped, family founded business. And so if you know one thing about private equity, there are kind of different kind of levels, right? Small cap, mid cap, and then you've got kind of the KKRs and the BlackRocks, et cetera, that go after big, big, big business. And so, I was in that kind of small to mid cap space in the early stages of my career, and was lucky enough to be involved in kind of my initial private equity transaction when I was with Cardon, you know.
And how does so we've had public company folks on the pod. What's different about it? Because I remember, funny story, I had actually interviewed at a company that was PE backed, and great interview. I was like the second candidate to be GC, and the recruiter came back and said they liked you a lot, but you just don't understand PE. And I said, guilty as charged. That is not me. So what does it mean to understand PE, and from a legal perspective as well?
I think it's just understanding what you're getting into. You're kind of forced to run lean. The public space, because there's more regulation, there's more focus on governance, there's more focus on infrastructure. There are certain expectations that Wall Street has on a publicly traded business that you have to execute on, right? So there's kind of a whole bunch of expense that gets bolted onto a business when they go public or are already public. I think on the private side, they're interested in buying a business, growing it, and selling it. And so part of that is understanding what's expected of legal in a way that can make it tough for a solo GC or even a small legal team to manage, but you have to figure out the right way to balance out the workload, manage outside spend, and then execute on the needs of the business, right? So it can be an interesting challenge. And the one clarifying comment I'm going to make, because my friends at Emerus will be like, Chuck, come on. What I did at Emerus was we had a category of spend that was called essentially unnecessary outside spend. That's what got eliminated. So we took that to zero. Unnecessary was essentially stuff that we kind of categorized as otherwise being able to be handled internally. The things that we maintained a relationship with outside counsel with on were like the sophisticated joint venture agreement negotiation, which I led, but I needed them to do the dirty work, so to speak. So just
Got it.
clear
No,
point.
that's helpful. I saw that stat, and it must have just been I was reading fast on your LinkedIn and
No,
what
it's
have you.
okay.
But that is helpful. But no, I think this concept of the mix, the blend between outside and inside spend is
Yeah.
I have seen it be different at different kinds of companies. Was that something? So you get to Cardon, paint us a picture. Like you said, you'd had some experiences
Oh my
that
gosh.
they liked.
Yeah.
And what did the company do? And kind of like what was the legal work?
So Cardon was a Medicaid eligibility business. So when you talk about like the healthcare revenue cycle, Medicaid eligibility is a part of it. It's not all of it, right? So it's essentially a group of people who are tasked with essentially interviewing uninsured hospital patients to determine if they could be eligible for Medicaid, and then doing the work to get them eligible that then allows the hospital to bill for that episode of care, right? So it's a pretty straightforward service, but at the time it was, labor heavy. We had ops center in Salt Lake City, we had headquarters in Houston. And so we were kind of attempting to grow that business to get the attention of private equity because the founders were interested in beginning to realize some liquidity on their investment, right? And so it was interesting. I mean, you always have these kind of moments where you take a job, you're like, are you serious? It's like, I remember on my first day, the head of HR, the guy that hired me into the business, he said, hey, let me talk to you for a minute. Walk into his office and he explains to me how they're in bet the business litigation with former founders. I'm like, okay, day one, let's go. So that kind of forces you to focus very quickly. And I think that was my first GC gig, right? So I had done some operational counsel work at a subrogation business at the time that was headquartered in Michigan. That was a startup enterprise, and I trained, hired, managed a team of lawyers in that context. And then I was a litigator before that. So I had kind of the right mix. I knew healthcare, I knew litigation. They were big on the hospital lien side as well. That was another service they provided, and I knew a lot about that. So they wanted to bring me in and kind of lead the charge since their former GC had left. And so, I came in, I took the job. They tell me about this litigation. So not only are you trying to just manage baseline growth in the business, we had to manage litigation where we were spending just a lot of money on, I think it was either 2 or 3 different law firms were involved. 3 law firms were involved that they had hired. They had been convinced, right? You're going to win.
Yeah.
It's gonna be great. And so it took me essentially having a sit down with the CEO at the time to say, listen, you need to understand like the economics of litigation. And so we had kind of that dialogue, right? Like it's not just about winning, it's about how much it costs to get there and the risk associated with potentially not winning. And so we had a really good discussion. The one thing I remember from that meeting, and I was a young guy at the time, right? I mean, I've been a GC for a long time. And so I got into that seat really young comparatively. I was in my 30s.
Yeah.
But I remember him looking at me and saying, and he was a very kind of silver-haired, handsome man who was like leading this business. And I remember him looking at me and saying, you are the first person that said this to us, like that said this to me, that there's, we have to consider these other issues. And so that set the stage for our exit from that battle, which we successfully exited through mediation. I can't remember how much later it was. Within a year, I think we settled that. And then it was off to the races. And so they were looking to bring on investors. We brought on private equity group called Sarant Capital, headquartered in San Francisco. They now have offices in Austin. And that was my first that was my training ground, essentially, of working with private equity.
So in that, so I think some of us have been there. You walk us through kind of your mindset from the "Are you serious?" meeting to the "Okay, you probably should maybe settle this because there's a lot of cost here," to the actual mediation. Because part of what our listeners are interested in, like, what does it mean to be great in-house counsel?
Yeah.
And so obviously you kicked it off well with that meeting where you had him literally tell you that he'd never had anybody hold up a mirror like that. And so then, like, what are the next steps that you took, and how did you continue to build that trust?
So I think this is where some of my law firm experience helped me. And I didn't work for big law. I worked for regional small law firms in Metro Detroit. Okay. But because of that fact, our clients were hyper concerned about budget and timing, right? And so when you consider the impact that, bet the business litigation has on a small to mid-sized business, you're evaluating at the point that I came in, I wanted to see the invoices. How much are they billing us per month? What's involved in these, like, what's the strategy here? Why do we have 3 law firms involved? Like these kinds of questions. And so it was a little abrasive at first because I kind of rocked the apple cart a little bit. I contacted one of the firms that was doing most of the work and I said, I'm not paying for XYZ. So that led to a productive conversation with the partner at the time around, okay, well, what do you want? How do you want us to help manage this? Simple things like moving to tenths of an hour off of quarter-hour increments, making sure there's documentation, making sure we're not paying for, administrative stuff. And so it's kind of just this is more like it's the common sense aspect of litigation that you're kind of seeking to understand relative to the way that firm operates. Are they taking advantage? Are they not? And respectfully, I don't mean that in a bad way, but I think it's a revenue generating business. So are we. you need to have that abrasiveness to make sure it's a good working relationship. And so it was analyzing and understanding what our track record was in terms of billings and knowing that we were about to approach a ramp because I think we were getting close to either trial or something like that, right? We were coming up on one of these events where you typically see the load of work build in preparation for that event. So you're trying to cut off that growth curve and fees and find less costly ways to get to a resolution. But then it's also in the back of your mind, you're always like, okay, well, it's going to cost me, $1 million to get from here today to trial because there's whatever depositions, whatever else has to happen. So you're playing within that kind of sandbox, right? So you've got $1 million to spend that you're looking at potentially. I'm trying to resolve or get to a point that I can resolve where I'm not spending that money. And so that was the driving kind of influence, which led us down a path to then engage in mediation. And then in the context of the mediation, I was the one that architected the game plan that led us down a path that got that case resolved at like midnight that night. We were there all day, all night, and we got the thing done. But I think it's understanding, it's taking the economic view and then applying it to the fact pattern, coming up with gives and takes. I mean, that's people, it sounds rational. People know this kind of instinctively, but you have to kind of hang your hat on the right factual elements and then use that as a counterbalance against this. There's a natural inclination to want to get into just a money discussion. I'm going to give you 10, I'm going to give you 5, I'm going to give you 7, I'm going to give you 6. Like, it's like, oh, like we need to set the foundation and get a commitment to the foundation, and then that drives you to a much better place. So that's part of the strategic assessment that you go through. But I remember sitting in that, it was Ogletree Deakins was the firm that handled the mediation for us, one of their partners in Houston. I remember sitting in that room. And so I was pitching my view, right? Which involved in these kind of puts and takes relative to the dispute. If they want this, then we need this, right? So I kind of pitched the concept. I was halfway through it. The guy says, that'll never work. I finish it, that could work. So it's one of those moments where it's the young guy, proposing an option that he thinks he knows where I'm headed, but he didn't. And so that's the other piece to this. There's a law firm mentality that in many instances is very, very helpful. But in some, it is not. And when you're driving the business towards executing on whatever it is, settling a case, signing a contract, law firms have a process. And you got to respect the process, and they will run through it, and they will issue spot, and they will give you everything on the list. But you have to be the one to say, I don't care about that. I care about that. I don't care about that. And so you're the one that distills it into, this is the stuff we really care about, because this other stuff is like, who cares? And so that's also where you can add a lot of value in terms of that interchange when you've got that hybrid relationship with counsel. And that also will lead you down a really good relationship path. There's a number of guys I've worked with, Norton Rose in Houston. I work with guys in McDermott in Chicago, really good guys that are smart, sharp, helpful. They understand my mindset. They know where I want to go. And when you get to that point, that relationship really becomes a value add as opposed to a cost issue,
I love
So I
that.
covered a lot there.
One of the things you said you came in and you're deciding what's important and what's not. That sounds to me like judgment. So what are the things that you do, switching to more the management side, for your team? So now, since then, you've been a GC, you've managed teams, you've grown people. How do you have others have the approach you took of understanding what's important and what's not,
Yeah.
getting to take those experiments in litigation, doing that kind of work, and then ultimately also bringing it back to the CEO? Because I imagine throughout, obviously you're dealing with your outside folks and litigation itself, but you're managing your clients as well.
Yeah. Well, I think relationships matter. And, with legal, it's a little bit different because most of our interactions are ad hoc or, emergency based in certain circumstances. And so it becomes less intentional. And so, the challenge in that environment is how do we as a team, continue to reinforce the fact that we want to be strategic advisors to the business. Okay. When you report to the CEO and have access to the board, it's a lot easier, but when you have a team, it depends on kind of where you are in the maturity cycle of the department, right? So and what I mean is, so in some situations, you've got a traditional law department approach. People are managing things on spreadsheets. They have a lot of meetings. They're giving you status updates in the meetings. It's kind of taking that and flipping it on its head and saying, wait a minute, I need to share my vision with you of the future of legal and how it could and should operate, which is obviously part of what GCAI is trying to do in the space, provide really relevant, and I want to talk about, I know we're going to get to it, but I want to talk to that a lot about that too. But I think that, you've got these competing executives, you've got CFOs, you got COOs, they deliver concrete reporting to the board every meeting that, if it's done well, is effective, it's insightful, and you can make decisions based on what they're kind of presenting. I want legal to do the same thing. And the first thing we have to do is get out of our own way and understand that technology has to become part of who we are as a business unit, right? Legal should not be satisfied being the cost center bottleneck, right? Which is, we read it on LinkedIn all the time. Like, we've heard about it for years and years and years, right? Let's not be satisfied. And so, okay, well, what does that mean, Chuck? It means looking at technology and how we can utilize it to drive enhancements in quality, efficiency, and capacity, right? And so I'm telling you this because you have to set the vision with the team. And that is a never ending exercise. Like, having the vision and explaining it, talking through it is not good enough. Like, you have to have a plan where people can look at it, see it, feel it. They have to be a part of that. You need to iterate on it. They have to get on board with it. You have to show them the way, and you have to recognize this is change management, and change management with lawyers is like really hard, right? Because they're used, even, it doesn't, I don't care how long you've been a lawyer. You could be a lawyer for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. It's hard to get on board with something that's different than what they've historically experienced. And so you have to acknowledge that and be okay with it and tell people there's this concept in change management. It's called the valley of despair. And we're going to get there. We are going to bottom out, and you're going to think, this stinks, Chuck. It's never going to work. It's causing me more work. You know what I'm talking about. But I think
I do, yeah. I mean, to the
right?
metaphors, like you've had some beautiful ones here, but I do say it's like riding a bike, right? You're gonna fall down, and you wear a helmet and whatever, but once you get on the bike, you're going faster, farther, having more fun. And so, yeah, I think that's right. So I want to know something you said. You said you have to show them the way, and I love that. I have an executive coach, and is one of his, I guess, principles is something to the effect of like, your team needs to know what good looks like. And so how do you show them the way? Like, literally, so there's other people that, like, you've had this amazing career, you've had, like, kind of 3 hits in a row, you're like at this, you found this niche, and like you're the guy in this niche. I mean, how do you show others the way? Like, what does it look like?
I think
Give us a story.
it's a lot of interpersonal communication. I mean, it's, you have to build trust and credibility, and you have to do it quickly. And what I would say is, your behaviors have to match your words, right? Like, that is the most impactful way that you can let them know that I got your back, I support you, this is going to be okay. And I think, and my personal philosophy has always been, if it's wrong, we'll readjust. And if it doesn't work, we'll stop doing it. So it doesn't scare me to try something that doesn't work. I mean, the example just at this job at IRC, I mean, we were going to try to utilize an on-demand paralegal for some, support on some kind of, low-hanging fruit type things. We did it for a couple months, didn't work, okay, we're done. Right. And so I think and that's that's a simple example, but it's also like establishing benchmarks. The team is nervous, right? I've talked about what I've seen. I've looked at kind of benchmarks you can get kind of through the internet, et cetera, through AI tools. I've gotten some feedback around benchmarks. GCI gave me some really great feedback, by the way, on benchmarks when we demoed it. But, people get really uncomfortable and look for excuses and reasons why and what is different. Healthcare is different. It takes more time. We can't guarantee when the other side. I know. That's okay. I'm not drawing the line here to penalize you at review time. I'm drawing the line here to hold us accountable to a standard, but more importantly, set expectations and hold our internal clients accountable to a standard. Because that's the other practical challenge when you run an in-house legal team. You need feedback from the business on any given day on 30 or 40 or 50 or 100 different matters, right? we have to be able to set the expectation with our clients around, we're asking you for a good reason. We expect you to get back to us within whatever it is, 5 business days, because we have to start to track that to understand how that ferrets into our workflow management, our staffing model, how we're leveraging support team members to handle kind of different activities, all that stuff. So, I mean, I'm kind of going all over the place, but I think that showing them the way fundamentally is just backing up what you say with words.
Yep.
But then also, you got to be a broken record. You really do,
Yep.
right? Broken record.
Love that. Awesome. So switching gears a little bit, your background, you've been very much owned compliance across functions, also done a lot of HR work. I think you had people responsibilities rolling up to you in your last role. Do you have a philosophy of compliance? And what's your kind of like, I'm a new GC, haven't done compliance before, or maybe I came up through transactions or corporate or something.
Yeah.
What's your wisdom?
So it's interesting, right? I think that earlier on in my career, there was kind of the beginnings of this kind of concept that compliance shouldn't actually report to legal. And there were a number of instances in the public sector where that kind of came home to roost, right? You had GCs that ran compliance that, in their role as GC were seeking to protect the business, but they were not appropriately addressing issues that needed to be reported out. And so there was it's a potential conflict, right? And so conceptually, in a healthcare business, I am very comfortable with compliance being its own department because I do think it should be relative to a lot of the healthcare based businesses, at least. I think sometimes you can't always do that because it's a smaller business. Typically, I would get thrown in the role because it's a necessity, right? So we got to run lean. We need to have a function. We got to have policy sets. They have to be enforced. You're the guide, Chuck. Okay. Right. And then it was the board's job to kind of counterbalance. Is what you make of it. I kind of boil it down to risk, and I have always advocated a view where you have to evaluate risk magnitude and risk likelihood separately, right? Because that's been the kind of Achilles heel of a lot of businesses, right? They kind of gloss over high magnitude risk because the likelihood is low. So that's the one probably area where I'm a little bit different than my counterparts and my compliance colleagues and all that to say, it doesn't mean that therefore means the answer is no, right? Or it should be no. It means that we're trying to change the risk trade-off decision dynamic with the board, right? I just want to make sure all these decisions are eyes wide open. And when you kind of focus on magnitude separately, I think it just helps illustrate how damaging a risk could be, right? Now,
Yeah, I mean, I've seen the 2x2 matrix of that. Yeah, I think it was Kristen at Lyft talks about that. Others, it's definitely been a topic of in-house, and it's a challenge, right? Because I think that like there is a tendency when you've got these really high magnitude ones of like, oh my God, you know, at least when I was a more junior lawyer of more like freaking out a little bit. But then, flip side, you can't ignore it either. I mean, I guess question that's coming to me is, you said people want policies, they want procedures, there's the culture aspects. How do you make sure compliance doesn't slow things down? And you mentioned compliance has a sales aspect to it, getting people to do things they don't want to do. Any tips and tricks or I mean, obviously there's no silver bullet, but what's your thought on that speed trade-off or making sure that you're able to keep pace?
yeah, I mean, I think that you have to align around organizational risk tolerance, right? So, and all that means is be intentional about understanding like relative to growth needs, where you sit in the market. Are you trying to gain market share? Are you a startup like trying to just drive growth? Sometimes bet the business risks are worth taking, but it's contextual. And so you have to have that dialogue with your senior executive team, which PS is a really great opportunity to build trust, credibility, judgment, all those things, right? So you're just changing the narrative a little bit, right? When you kind of sit down and say, look, we need to talk about just generally what our kind of guardrails are in terms of our risk tolerance, right? So it's like risk tolerance, risk appetite. Sometimes they're different. Sometimes tolerance can be high, but appetite is low. Sometimes they're aligned. sometimes the appetite for risk is higher than your tolerance
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
because you're
For
in
sure.
that startup. So I think just recognizing the need to have a dialogue goes a long way. And then I think it's a group decision. I mean, I think we always have to, it's the power of influence, right? It's not because we must, but because "Hey, this makes a lot of sense. Chuck is saying some stuff that resonates. This is probably the right decision, right? It's that kind of, exercising influence as opposed to mandating. Now, I think there's a time and place for mandating, especially on the compliance side. But I can tell you, by and large, most of the executives and people you work with, they're not bad actors, right? They don't want to break the law.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. I've definitely seen that where it's like people want to do the right thing, and there's a thing in security where it's like you want to make it easy to do the right thing, right? Like the using of the discussion around using WhatsApp groups or whatever in the presidency. Like, okay, give them a secure, easy way to communicate so they don't have to do that. So
Yeah.
you see that come up a lot. I guess other question, switching to maybe Axiom. You were CLO and CHRO. It's an interesting combination. I think it is on the rise. How did you literally like wear two hats and be like, no, I'm CHRO, no, I'm CLO? And if not, or if you did, like put us in your shoes, you're in a board meeting or an exec meeting. How are you navigating that?
Yeah, I mean, I always felt like it was a blending of the two. But what I would say was my kind of love of data analytics and informed decision making arose when I actually ran HR and talent acquisition at Cardon Healthcare as well, Cardon Outreach. And so I've had a lot of HR kind of management experience. And so I really enjoyed digging into like turnover numbers, trends, 90-day turnover relative to kind of, we tried Wonderlic tests to see if we could pre-screen people. Like we went through a bunch of cool stuff. And it was always that side of the business really excited me because for some reason I just loved being able to have those discussions at the board level because private equity cares about HR. They care about those statistics and people and how what our hiring timelines are and all that kind of stuff. And so that was a great education for me because it then informed how I began to think about, okay, legal can do better. It's not just about managing litigation, reporting out on, well, we got sued 5 times in the past quarter and we resolved 3. I mean, that's not impactful. And so it's finding the right way to drive impact in the organization, which comes down to workflow, labor arbitrage, cost management, those kinds of concepts that you typically see in other departments. Like legal can do that,
Wow,
anyway.
I
So
love that. Legal can do that. So how? So I mean, obviously, so we talked a little bit about AI.
yeah,
Full disclosure, I guess Chuck is not using GCAI, although I know he regrets it from our 15 minutes here that
I'm
we're
not
talking. But in
timing.
general, like, so this is something we do have a lot of folks. We work with Paragon and others of these kind of ALSPs, and I think it is a stat that I pay a lot of attention to because GCAI, of course, is geared in-house. A little about what you said of spend on in-house counsel has continued to go up. Most of the teams we work with are north of 50%. I've seen teams, some of our software company customers are at 80, 90%. Talked to the GC of Netflix. He gave a presentation at Tech GC and said they have a very kind of clear rubric for like, you spend X on a matter, it becomes an in-house lawyer almost immediately. And they've gotten there, including globally, because of course Netflix operates in every country. And they had to tweak risk. I guess question for you is like, so legal can do better. What are the things like give us some like concrete tactics? So assume I'm a GC listening and I'm like, all right, I can do better. I'm not wasn't traditionally kind of like a budgets and workflows person. What am I doing?
Here's one. Let me give you a specific example first, and that'll lead to a more kind of general dialogue. So when I started at IRC, within my first week, I think the CFO, who I've worked with for a long time in different businesses, right? So he sends a note out, hey, I need an NDA for XYZ company, right? Okay. He sends it to, I'm copied on it because it's sent to one of the attorneys on the team. It took 3 attorneys 2 days, maybe 3, I think now, to generate our template NDA for him to then send to XYZ
Oh my
corporates,
gosh.
right?
You can't, yeah, if you're listening, if what I would do on Zoom is I would find the little scary emoji and it would be like flying up through Zoom. But yeah, okay. So that's a good story. So
Yeah.
then what did you do?
So job one and two, really, was identifying opportunities for automation, self-service automation in the business. Okay. NDAs are a perfect example. We have a stock form. We had technology we could use that people could log in, put in information. It would automatically generate the PDF and house a copy in Word format for the lawyers if they needed it in the future, if it got redlined, ready to rock and roll within minutes. And so what that does is, okay, so that's a tactical example. The way you think about turning that into strategic value is when you are tracking your workflow. So you have a way to categorize the kinds of work that's coming in, right? You can begin to put it in this kind of, quadrant based analysis, right? Of, high value, low risk, low value, high risk, right? You've got this kind of box layout. By identifying low risk, low value matters first, that's where you automate, delegate, or get rid of that stuff, right? So that's step one. And then you understand that on average, you may have, 20% of your matters fall within that quadrant analysis. So it's rational to think that you could automate, delegate, or eliminate that from your workload, right? For example, what does that do? Frees up capacity, brings down the per matter cost, right? And it's like low hanging fruit that you can immediately demonstrate back to the business, right? Here is the value and the benefit of taking this approach. Quick win. It's a quick win, right? uh, you can become more sophisticated by utilizing that same approach, right? When you start to categorize further, maybe there are certain aspects of the workload that could be planned out and become more routine, right? So maybe we just need an annual plan that gets executed on by lower level support staff that doesn't clog up the attorney's bandwidth, right? Lease renewals, mundane stuff, termination letters on vendor agreements like janitorial, stuff like that. You can even automate that stuff too, depending on the circumstance. But so by beginning to, you have to understand your workflow, understand the volumes, categorize, and then you can begin to kind of tackle those bit by bit. We haven't touched legal spend, by the way, at IRC. That's next year. Not touching that.
Okay, so you had a trade-off to make. You're like, so you came in and you had a choice to make of like, am I going to tackle efficiency or spend first? And it sounds like you went for efficiency
Oh
and
yeah,
team,
all
or
day
like
long.
what was it? You said next year, and then how did you have that conversation with the CEO or with the PE backers in advance of like, hey, you're not going to see legal spend go down year one. You're going to see XYZ.
It's one of those wacky instances where they really don't care right now about legal spend because there's it's not enough of an impact for it to become a higher level attention getter because a lot of our litigation is joint venture based and there's insurance coverage. And so if we're getting dinged on deductibles, right? Our kind of self-insured retention numbers, which are meaningful, but they're not enough of a mover to make it job one. Now, from an outside looking in perspective, I know that there's a ton of value you can bring to the business by managing outside spend, but I'm also very aware of how much change I put on my people in a very short amount of time. And I cannot continue to throw stuff at them. I just can't. We need to get to a steady state and then we'll begin to plan out some of these broader strategic things, right? Because I need them to come along with me. And it's very easy for folks to get off track if they, I talked about behavior matching words. Sometimes, like, I'll say something, the behavior is delayed for whatever reason. And then my folks will be like, Chuck, what's going on? We're not comfortable. Here's what we're seeing. And I'll have to, like, it's a reset opportunity every single time. Right. So I'm very aware of the burden, even though in the end, right, it's going to work, even though in the end it's going to work, I cannot continue to throw stuff on them. New process, new system. Like it's going to become too much for my folks. I mean, they're having a hard, talking about like agentic workflows now, which is kind of the next big thing, right? It's like people are freaking out about that, you know, freaking out.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
so
I
I'm
mean,
not suggesting.
it's. I think there's a couple points here. There's like the words have to match the music always, and then I'm hearing for me what's resonating in what you said is like as CEO now, we're in a moment in legal AI, right? Like literally, this is the year, next year, this year, next year. I got 95% of people in my webinars saying that they have a legal AI goal in 25. And so for me, it's like, how hard can I push everyone and the industry to do it? Do I have to pick? And that decision is really like a real nugget of leadership. And I love how you got to that. I think the other point that you made around like um, you know, bringing people on the journey and kind of like being selective about that and leading from the front, like anything there, like I guess is there any way to be a successful GC without doing that? Like not really, right? Like is that the nugget of your success? I guess maybe that's a good way to ask it.
I mean, I kind of think it is. I mean, I've had a unique career path, I think. And unlike a lot of my peers, my mentors have been operators.
Mm.
So aside from, when I was cutting my teeth as a litigation attorney, where I worked in a law firm environment, I had mentors, in that context. Once I moved, I knew I wanted something different. I moved into kind of a business facing role. I feel like it's keeping an open mind and understanding I don't know anything. Like I got to educate myself on everything. And then I got really lucky with there's a mentor of mine, the guy that was the CEO of Cardon Outreach when PE bought him, the guy that's the CEO of Axiom Medical to this day. Mark Robinson had an outsized influence on my development. He was just a really great thought partner. He actively involved me in discussions and supported me. So I think that that's the other lesson for non-legal executives out of this, I think, is that you can make a difference and have an influence. Like some execs are very wary and hesitant to engage with legal. They just don't understand it, don't want to understand it, don't want to deal with it because we're a bottleneck, all the reasons we hear all the time. If you can find someone that's willing to develop that kind of relationship just to bounce ideas off of, which really is what other than a lot of support I got when I first took over human resources, having that sounding board is so valuable, so valuable.
It's so interesting because I think when people ask me this similar question of like, what does it take to be a great GC? And I think it's what you said, where the legal knowledge, the legal side is just absolutely table stakes. And it's like, you're not going to distinguish yourself, get promoted, get sought after by people doing only that. And so same for me, my mentors and people I've looked up to very early on were obviously great lawyers, but once I got to a certain level, I definitely looked to folks outside of legal. And I do think like the experience of running HR, I ran HR briefly at one of my roles. It definitely was like how to be great at that. There are a lot of similar elements, but it's not the same. And I love the story you told of, okay, running HR actually made me really focused on numbers. And then I brought that back to legal. So I think that's a great takeaway for our listeners too, is like these kind of core skills and then change management. Like, I mean, I love it. So what do you do? Tell us about your current role at IRC, and then what's the goal? Or maybe it's public, maybe it's not. But is there something that like what were you brought in to do? And then we'll head to our lightning round.
Yes, my predecessor was leaving IRC to pursue a different opportunity. This is the company I work for now is a dialysis business. I've been healthcare essentially my entire career, but not dialysis. And so, as I said, I'm the CFO. As a friend of mine, he reached out to me and asked me if I was interested in interviewing for the role, and it worked out. I met the executive team. And this was a bigger opportunity for me, and that it had an existing legal team with no technology to speak of, right? And so that excited me a ton was, okay, now I can come in, have them, kind of understand my view on this, we implemented a legal matter management tool immediately. I started in May of last year. By July, they were, trying to figure it out. God bless them. And we're still in that transitionary phase. We really are. And so now the next step is I have to be very crystal clear on my vision, but then I also need my internal clients to utilize our front door, right? The portal to ask for stuff. And that'll help capture more of those matters and give us more visibility so we can continue to do that categorization exercise and then identify self-help, automation, et cetera. But I think where I'm really excited is how AI tools can impact. So here's my take.
Please.
I think there is the AI tools like GCAI are a force multiplier for my support level folks, for my paralegal team. And so I think that if you leverage the intake process, the triage process, and allow the tools to help you kind of process information as it's coming in, red lines based on this stuff. Red lines based on playbooks, answers to questions on existing leases, for example, whatever, right? We can use AI tools to get to a discussion draft at the very least that can then be immediately presented to attorneys for feedback, comments, and then off to counsel. So, or off to the other side or the internal business partner. It's very fundamental, right? There's just a way we can become a lot faster and free up bandwidth to the attorneys. So eventually, right, the goal would be after kind of this pilot phase, we're still moving in this direction. We're not there yet. Okay. After the pilot phase is then to begin to hand off certain aspects of the business to that support level, right, over time. And then they're just kind of sending it, where they need to send it with attorney co-pilot oversight. Like we hear that term a lot.
Yeah. 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 But I think it's a little bit like, they said, I can't remember if it's like Henry Ford or one of the kind of industrial era thinkers, something to the effect of like a well-run factory, Drucker, I think. A well-run factory is kind of boring. Like you walk in and it's like humming along and there's not like crazy crisis. And like, oh, what do you think of the widget coming off the line? Like the widget just comes off the line perfectly, right? And so I think bringing that mentality and ability to legal, AI is doing it like nothing I've ever seen. Like I do think, your CLMs of the world, workflow tools, the companies that we work with that have had deep legal operations, like respect, and they've done it. When you think about an entity like Google and you get an NDA done in 5 minutes with Google,
Yeah.
it's like automatic when you sign up, you go visit the campus and you're doing it on an iPad. So these kinds of operations, like I'm excited for you.
Yeah,
Thanks for
it's
the
gonna
wisdom.
be. I mean, it'll be fun. I think I'd like one last point that's important I want to make. I know you want to get to lightning round, but it's this. I think that as we continue to focus on these ways to make lawyers more effective and efficient and faster in certain regards, what potentially gets lost is the opportunity for our folks to engage with their clients, kind of more consistently, right? So you're kind of putting your more self-help, more automation, more support level work. Lawyers are like, wait a minute, I need that relationship. That has to be a focus, right? And so I think that as you look to the future, the focus is going to be on creating intentional interaction, finding the right things to go and talk to the business leaders about. Not just, oh, we get an NDA, let's chat about XYZ. No, we need to design interactions, our team does, to continue to enforce the strategic importance that we bring to the table, right? So that's going to be the next big work in progress in my mind, is designing that kind of interaction schedule and then figuring out if it works or not.
Yeah, and I mean, I think this is where the fast moving aspect comes in, right? So I did put an example on my LinkedIn the other day of, so early Uber, they needed an agreement with their drivers. And you can imagine that a non-strategic legal team would have been like, all right, here you go, driver agreement. But no, what they actually had, they called it an IP license. They called it a platform access agreement. And that kind of brilliance of like, where is this business going? We got to preserve, employment lawyer, we got to preserve the contractor relationship. If we have something called a driver agreement,
Right.
that's not that. So they had this kind of like that. When people ask me, like, what does it mean in a post AI world to practice strategically? It's what you said. It's like, what are the conversations you need to have? What are you prompting the tool to do? But like, okay, we need an NDA, fine, snooze. But like, what is that partner going to bring to the table? Is it going to be a joint venture? Is it going to be this? Is it going to be that? And then what are the trends that you're seeing, right? So, we didn't get into it because you're in healthcare, or, because we had other topics to talk about. But when you think about like healthcare and like, you guided a healthcare company through COVID, right? And like that was changing all of the time. I was a fractional at the time, and the rules were like we were looking at the orders coming out basically every 2 weeks on this stuff. So it was very much like that ability to real time make those judgments is like, I want GCI to get there, and I think it will. But right now it's folks like you. Awesome. Good stuff. All right. So let's get to the lightning round. So a book, article, or resource you recommend or that's had an influence on you.
Two. Okay. I have them right here, so I'm going to show you on the screen. So the first is Building an Outstanding Legal Team. And this is by Bjorn Tellman. It's a really great resource to kind of think about, like if you're a first-time GC, even if you've been in the role for years, there's a lot of great structures and thought that he placed into this book that are really, it's really great. It's really great. And then now you add your own kind of experience to it, and then it's even better. And then this is such a quick read. Michael Hyatt, it's No Fail Meetings.
No fail
It's
meetings. I love that.
like
Done.
you can read this in like an hour on a plane. I mean,
I'm literally downloading it now.
I'm
I got a
telling
flight to
you,
Austin this afternoon.
it is like I have to read it again because I'm 50 years old, so I forget a lot of stuff. But it is so refreshing because the approach is so my team, we found a box of these in one of the rooms at the headquarters building today. And so I'm like, take one and give them to each of my team members because this it's that important because we get stuck at meetings all day long and it is not that is not your job. And so finding a way to navigate that problem, this book is great. It's great.
Done. All right. I'm literally like, I got a flight this afternoon. I can't wait to dive in. All right. Give us a bold prediction. What's the GC role going to look like in a decade?
I think it's going to be less lawyers, more technology, more support.
Love that. All right. Any
I mean,
other
that's not
parting
really
wisdom?
bold.
It's not bold. I mean, bold is like, but the thing is like, what is it? They say, people underestimate the change in a year, or I'm sorry, overestimate the change in a year, underestimate it in 10. So I think
Yeah.
that's in line.
Yeah. It can be a lonely job and, surrounding yourself with the right support network and people that having a life outside of work, really, really matters because that's what you lean on when times are tough. Cause it's one thing I missed about the law firm environment was having colleagues and being able to commiserate on challenges and issues. And you don't really get that as much in this role. And so I think it's just finding the right way to express yourself and, unplug. Probably the most important advice I would give you is always schedule block time for yourself for thinking time at least once a week, at least, because that's where you'll discover so much about yourself and you'll find a lot of cool stuff that you can do in your business.
Love that. So good. Anything else to leave our listeners with, Chuck?
I don't think so. Thanks so much. It's been a lot of fun. I love talking about this stuff. So it's just a lot of fun. So I appreciate it.
Chuck, thank you. And thank you so much for sharing your insights today. Thanks again. That was my conversation with Chuck Kable, a seasoned executive who's proven that legal leadership can be a catalyst for transformation. Chuck had so many insights about in-house, about leadership, about taking time to think about, and about showing your team the way. I'm so excited to read his book recommendations and to get in and practice his leadership. If you're thinking about how to elevate your role beyond legal functions, I hope this conversation gave you both practical guidance and inspiration for what's possible. Follow CZ and Friends wherever you get your podcasts and subscribe to our newsletter at gc.ai/newsletter for behind the scenes insights and actionable tips. We'll also put in the show notes Chuck's books, and you can find him on LinkedIn as well. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.